The boy checked his boarding pass for the 5th time, glancing at the large digital clock hanging overhead. Flight 247 to Miami, gate C-17, boarding in 45 minutes. His dad had sent him ahead while dealing with an emergency call that couldn't wait. "I'll meet you at the gate before boarding," his father had promised, straightening the boy's collar before rushing back to his office for what he swore would be just 10 minutes. That had been half an hour ago. At 12 years old, Andre wasn't exactly nervous about sitting alone at the airport gate. He'd been flying with his father since he was 6, though always with his dad right beside him. This was different but not scary. More like an adventure, a small taste of the independence he constantly told his father he was ready for. The first-class waiting area was quieter than the general boarding sections. Soft leather seats instead of the hard plastic chairs that filled most of the terminal, a charging station at every seat. Even a small refreshment counter with complimentary drinks and snacks. Andre sat up straight, trying to look like he belonged. Like waiting alone for a flight was something he did all the time. His father's words from earlier that morning played in his head. "Remember, buddy, shoulders back, eyes forward. You carry yourself with dignity, always." Andre pulled his father's copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X from his backpack. His dad had suggested he start it during the flight, but now seemed as good a time as any. He was 2 pages in when his stomach growled. The breakfast smoothie from earlier was wearing off. Looking toward the refreshment counter, Andre considered whether he should get something to eat. His dad would be here soon, but who knew how long soon really meant when it came to his father's emergency meetings. Tucking the book back into his backpack, Andre made his way to the counter. He was reaching for an apple when someone bumped into him from behind. Andre stumbled forward slightly, his hand knocking over a neat stack of packaged cookies. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, bending down to pick up the scattered packages. "What do you think you're doing?" a stern voice demanded. Andre looked up to see a uniformed security officer towering over him. The man's name badge read Officer Dawson. His face was set in hard lines, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Just getting a snack, sir," Andre replied, straightening up with the packages in his hands. "I accidentally knocked these over when someone bumped into me." Officer Dawson's eyes swept over Andre, taking in his pressed khaki pants and button-up shirt, then landed back on his face with unchanged suspicion. "This area is for first-class passengers only," the officer said, his voice rising enough that heads began to turn in their direction. "Let me see your boarding pass." Andre set the cookies back on the counter and reached into his pocket for the folded boarding pass. "I am a first-class passenger," he said quietly. "I'm waiting for my dad. He's running late." Officer Dawson snatched the boarding pass from Andre's outstretched hand, studying it with exaggerated scrutiny. People were definitely watching now. Andre could feel their eyes on him, curious and uncomfortable. "Richardson," the officer read the name aloud, looking from the pass to Andre and back again. "This is your boarding pass?" "Yes, sir." "That's my last name." The officer's eyebrows rose. "And where exactly did you get this first-class ticket?" The implication in his tone was clear. Andre felt a flush of heat rise from his neck to his cheeks. He'd heard that tone before, seen that look. His father had prepared him for moments like this, but preparation didn't make it hurt any less. "My father bought it," Andre answered, working to keep his voice steady. "We're going to Miami for my spring break." "Uh-huh." Officer Dawson folded his arms across his chest, the boarding pass still pinched between his fingers. "And where is this father of yours?" "He had an emergency meeting. He's on his way here now." Andre glanced at the clock again. 35 minutes until boarding. His dad would be here any minute. He just needed to stay calm until then. An emergency meeting. The officer repeated the words like he was translating from a foreign language. Convenient. A woman sitting nearby looked up from her laptop, her eyes moving between Andre and the security officer with growing concern. An older man lowered his newspaper, but no one said anything. "Look," Andre said, trying to sound reasonable, mature. "You can call him if you want. I have his number." Officer Dawson's radio crackled with static, but he ignored it, instead gesturing toward Andre's backpack. "What's in there?" "Just my stuff for the flight. Books, my tablet, some snacks. Now let's see it." The officer held out his hand. Andre hesitated. Do you need to search my bag? I haven't done anything wrong." "Are you refusing a security check, son?" Officer Dawson's voice took on an official warning tone. No, sir, Andre replied quickly. I just don't understand why. Airport security isn't something you need to understand. It's something you need to comply with. The officer beckoned with his fingers. The bag. Now. With reluctant hands, Andre handed over his backpack. By now, at least a dozen passengers were watching the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from curious to uncomfortable to outright disapproving. But whether they disapproved of him or the officer's behavior, Andre couldn't tell. Officer Dawson unzipped the backpack and began removing items one by one, placing them on a nearby chair with theatrical deliberateness. The Malcolm X book, a tablet in a protective case, a bag of trail mix, a water bottle, a pair of headphones, a travel pillow. That's a pretty fancy tablet for a kid, the officer commented, turning the device over in his hands. It was a birthday gift from my dad, Andre explained, his voice growing smaller despite his efforts to stay strong. This was wrong, and he knew it. But he also knew from his father's many careful talks that protesting too forcefully could make things worse. Your dad must be doing pretty well for himself, Officer Dawson said, his tone making it clear he doubted the story. He opened the front pocket of the backpack and pulled out Andre's phone. Nice phone, too. A lump formed in Andre's throat. The humiliation was starting to outweigh his determination to stay calm. His eyes burned with the threat of tears, but he blinked them back fiercely. He would not cry. Not here? Is there a problem here? A woman's voice cut through the tension. Andre turned to see a flight attendant approaching, her expression professionally concerned. Officer Dawson straightened up slightly. Just a routine security check, ma'am. Nothing to worry about. The flight attendant looked at Andre, then at his belongings spread across the chair, and then back to the officer. In the middle of the first-class lounge. The young man here says he's a first-class passenger, but he's alone. And his story about why doesn't add up. I showed him my boarding pass, Andre said, grateful for the flight attendant's intervention, but still fighting to keep his voice from shaking. My dad's coming. He just had a meeting that ran long. The flight attendant held out her hand to Officer Dawson. May I see the boarding pass, please? With visible reluctance, the officer handed it over. The flight attendant examined it and nodded. This appears to be in order. Mr. Richardson is indeed booked in first class seat 3A, and there's a companion ticket for seat 3B. That's my dad's seat, Andre explained. James Richardson. At the mention of the name, the flight attendant's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition that came and went so quickly Andre wasn't sure he'd seen it. Officer, she said, her tone noticeably more firm, I don't see any reason to continue this, whatever this is. This young man has a valid ticket and has done nothing wrong. With all due respect, ma'am, I'm in charge of security, not customer satisfaction, and when I see something suspicious, what exactly is suspicious about a child waiting for his parent at the correct gate with a valid boarding pass? The flight attendant interrupted. Officer Dawson's face hardened. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to keep passengers safe, not to harass them, the flight attendant countered, her professional demeanor never slipping despite the steel in her words. A small crowd had gathered now, watching the standoff with undisguised interest. Andre wished he could disappear. This was exactly the kind of attention his father had always taught him to avoid, not because they had anything to hide, but because the world had a way of turning situations like these against people who looked like them, regardless of the truth. The officer opened his mouth to respond when his radio crackled again, this time with a voice coming through clearly. Dawson, we need you at security checkpoint B, over. With obvious frustration, Officer Dawson gathered Andre's belongings and roughly shoved them back into the backpack. He thrust both the bag and the boarding pass at Andre. Don't make me come back over here, he warned before turning on his heel and striding away, the crowd parting before him like water. Andre clutched his backpack to his chest, his heart pounding. The flight attendant placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? She asked quietly. Andre nodded, not trusting his voice. Your father will be here soon? She confirmed. Yes, ma'am, he managed. Thank you for helping. She gave him a small, sad smile that suggested she understood more than she was saying. Try to enjoy your trip to Miami when he gets here. The weather's beautiful this time of year. As she walked away, Andre returned to his seat, sinking down with his backpack still held tightly against him. The other passengers gradually returned to their own business, though he could feel occasional glances still coming his way. He checked the clock again. 25 minutes until boarding. His dad would be here any minute now. Andre took a deep breath and tried to focus on that thought instead of the burning shame and anger still coursing through him. Any minute now, his father would walk through those doors. And somehow Andre knew everything would change when he did. Andre's hands trembled slightly as he tried to repack his backpack. The flight attendant's intervention had given him a moment of relief, but he could still feel the stares of other passengers burning into his back. He zipped the bag shut and placed it beside him, trying to appear calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. 20 minutes until boarding. Still no sign of his father. He pulled out his phone, checking for messages. Nothing. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Should he text his dad? Tell him what happened? No, his father was already rushing to get here. Telling him about Officer Dawson would only upset him, and there was nothing he could do about it now anyway. Andre put his phone away and tried to focus on his book again, but the words blurred before his eyes. The incident kept replaying in his head. The officer's tone, the stares from strangers, the humiliation of having his belongings dumped out like contraband. Excuse me. Andre looked up to see an elderly woman standing beside his seat, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. Is this seat taken? She asked, gesturing to the empty spot next to him. No, ma'am, Andre replied, quickly moving his backpack to make room. The woman settled herself with a soft sigh. Thank you, dear. She glanced at him, then away, then back again, clearly wanting to say something more. Finally, she spoke. That officer was completely out of line. Are you all right? Andre was caught off guard by her directness. I'm okay, he said automatically. The woman gave him a knowing look. You're being very brave, but what happened wasn't right. She lowered her voice. I would have said something, but these days... She trailed off, shaking her head. Andre nodded, understanding what she couldn't quite say. His father had explained it to him. How sometimes people wanted to help but were afraid of making things worse, or drawing attention to themselves, or simply didn't know what to do. My son is a pilot, the woman continued. 20 years with the airline. He would be appalled by what just happened. It's okay, Andre said, feeling strangely like he was comforting her rather than the other way around. The flight attendant helped. The woman's face brightened slightly. Yes, she did. Good for her. She patted Andre's hand lightly. Your parents raised a very polite young man. Thank you, Andre replied, thinking of his father and how he always emphasized the importance of dignity, even especially in difficult situations. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the gate desk. Officer Dawson had returned and he wasn't alone. Another security officer, shorter but broader, stood beside him. They were speaking with the gate agent, whose expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued. Andre felt his stomach drop. They were looking in his direction. The elderly woman followed his gaze. Oh dear, she murmured. Officer Dawson and his colleague began walking toward Andre. The other passengers noticed, conversations faltering as attention shifted once again to the 12-year-old boy, sitting alone in the first-class waiting area. Stay calm, dear, the elderly woman whispered. I'm right here. Andre appreciated her support, but it did little to slow his racing heart as the officers approached. I need you to come with me, son, Officer Dawson said without preamble. Why? Andre asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I showed you my boarding pass. I haven't done anything wrong. We just need to ask you a few more questions, the second officer said, his tone slightly less confrontational than Dawson's but no less firm. His name tag read Officer Bryant. I'm not going anywhere, Andre said, remembering his father's instructions for situations like this. I'm waiting for my dad and my flight boards in 15 minutes. This won't take long, Officer Dawson insisted. Security protocol. The elderly woman beside Andre straightened in her seat. Excuse me, officers, but what exactly is the security concern here? This young man has already shown you his boarding pass. Officer Bryant turned to her. Ma'am, this is a security matter. We'd appreciate your cooperation. I'm not leaving, Andre repeated louder this time. A few more heads turned. Officer Dawson's expression hardened. Listen, kid. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but you are coming with us to answer some questions. About what? Andre demanded, fear giving way to frustration. What did I do? Instead of answering, Officer Dawson reached for Andre's backpack. Let's start by taking another look at this. You already searched it, Andre protested. Grabbing for his bag, Officer Dawson yanked it away, and in doing so, the backpack's contents spilled out once again, this time across the floor. Andre's books, tablets, snacks, and water bottles scattered at the feet of nearby passengers. A man in a business suit looked up from his laptop. "Hey, that's unnecessary," he called out, but made no move to intervene further. The elderly woman stood up, surprisingly steady on her feet. "Young man," she said, addressing Officer Dawson despite the age difference, "I'm going to need your supervisor's name and badge number." Officer Bryant stepped between them. "Ma'am, please sit down. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us when you treat a child this way," she replied firmly. Andre crouched down, gathering his belongings while trying to become as small as possible. His face burned with humiliation. This was so much worse than before. Now it wasn't just one officer, it was two. And they weren't just questioning him. They were treating him like a criminal. Officer Dawson crouched beside him, voice low so that only Andre could hear. "Listen, we know that's not really your boarding pass. Someone like you doesn't just have a first-class ticket to Miami. So why don't you tell us who you took it from, and maybe we can sort this out without calling juvenile services." The words hit Andre like a physical blow. "Someone like me?" he repeated, the implication unmistakable. "You know what I mean," Officer Dawson said dismissively. "A kid your age alone with a first-class ticket? That doesn't add up." "My father bought the ticket," Andre insisted, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "James Richardson. Call him if you don't believe me." "Oh, we will," Officer Dawson assured him. "But first, you're coming with us to the security office." The flight attendant who had intervened earlier returned, quickly assessing the situation. "Officers, what's happening here?" "I already confirmed this passenger has a valid ticket." Officer Bryant turned to her. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe this ticket may have been obtained fraudulently." "Based on what evidence?" the flight attendant challenged. "That's confidential," Officer Dawson said. "Security protocol." The gate agent approached, looking anxious. "Officers, boarding for this flight begins in 10 minutes. If there's a legitimate security concern, we need to know now." Officer Dawson straightened up. "We have reason to believe that I don't belong in first class?" Andre interrupted, unable to contain himself any longer. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" A heavy silence fell over the gate area. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The flight attendant's professional demeanor cracked slightly, her eyes flashing with anger. "Officers, I've confirmed this passenger's ticket is valid. Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you leave him alone and let us prepare for boarding." "We have procedures," Officer Bryant began. "So do we," the flight attendant cut in. "And they don't include harassing our passengers without cause." The standoff continued, tension thick in the air. Andre looked around, seeing a mix of expressions on the faces watching the scene unfold. Some looked troubled, others embarrassed, a few angry, but most seemed uncertain, torn between the discomfort of witnessing injustice and the reluctance to challenge authority. A businessman nearby cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the officers. "I've been sitting here for the past hour. This young man has been nothing but quiet and well-behaved. Whatever your concerns are, surely there's a better way to address them than this." More voices joined in. "This is ridiculous," someone called out. "Leave the kid alone," said another. Officer Dawson's face flushed with anger, but Officer Bryant placed a restraining hand on his colleague's arm, clearly sensing that the situation was spinning out of control. "We're just doing our jobs," Officer Bryant said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Security is everyone's concern." "So is basic decency," the elderly woman retorted, still standing her ground. The gate agent's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then handed it to the flight attendant, who also listened briefly before her eyes widened slightly. "Officers," the flight attendant said, her tone suddenly different, cooler, more formal. "I've just been informed that Mr. Richardson is on his way to the gate now. Perhaps we should all wait for his arrival before proceeding further." Something in her manner made both officers hesitate. Officer Dawson looked like he wanted to object, but Officer Bryant shook his head slightly. 5 minutes, Officer Bryant said finally. "We'll wait 5 minutes." Andre's heart leapt. His dad was coming. Everything would be okay once his dad arrived. He knew it with absolute certainty. The next 5 minutes stretched like an eternity. Andre sat rigidly in his seat, the elderly woman beside him maintaining a protective presence. The flight attendant remained nearby, occasionally checking her watch. The officers stood a short distance away, Officer Dawson glowering while Officer Bryant spoke quietly into his radio. Other passengers pretended to return to their books and devices, but Andre could feel their attention still fixed on the drama unfolding before them. The humiliation of the past half hour burned like a physical wound, but now there was something else too: anticipation. The boarding announcement would come soon. Where was his father? And then, as if in answer to his silent question, the gate area doors swung open. A tall figure stepped through, moving with purpose and authority. Even from a distance, the quality of his tailored suit was evident, as was the commanding presence he carried effortlessly with him. Heads turned automatically as he passed. Conversations pausing mid-sentence. Andre felt a surge of relief and pride so powerful it nearly brought tears to his eyes. His father had arrived, and something told him Officer Dawson was about to regret everything that had happened in the past 30 minutes. James Richardson moved through the airport terminal with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, not a thread out of place despite his rushed journey across the city. People instinctively stepped aside as he passed, though he gave no outward indication of expecting such deference. His mind was on his son. The emergency board meeting had run longer than anticipated, much longer, and his repeated attempts to text Andre had failed due to the building's notorious reception issues. He'd finally managed to call the gate, only to learn from an anxious-sounding gate agent that there was a situation involving his son. That was all James needed to hear. He had ended the call, made a brief apology to the board members, and left without further explanation. Some things took priority over everything else. His son was at the top of that list. As James approached Gate C-17, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. The first-class waiting area was unusually quiet, with passengers pretending to read or work while their attention was clearly focused elsewhere. Following their gazes, James saw what had captured their interest: 2 security officers standing near the gate desk, and beside them, Andre James felt a flash of cold anger when he saw his son's expression, a mixture of humiliation, defiance, and relief at seeing his father. He recognized that look. He had worn it himself too many times in his life. Rather than rushing forward, James took a moment to assess the situation. One officer, short, stocky, with a name tag reading Bryant, was speaking quietly into his radio. The other, taller, with Dawson on his badge, stood with arms crossed, scowling at Andre. A silver-haired elderly woman sat protectively close to his son, while a flight attendant hovered nearby, watching the officers with barely concealed disapproval. James adjusted his tie, a subtle calming gesture he had developed years ago as an alternative to showing anger. Then he walked forward. The flight attendant noticed him first. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition before her professional demeanor reasserted itself. She stepped toward him. "Mr. Richardson," she said just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Thank you for joining us." At the sound of the name, Officer Bryant turned, his radio conversation forgotten. Officer Dawson, however, remained focused on Andre, either not hearing or choosing to ignore the new arrival. "Dad," Andre called out, starting to rise from his seat. "Stay there, son," Officer Dawson ordered sharply. "We're not finished here." James felt another surge of anger but kept his expression neutral as he approached. Years of navigating boardrooms and business negotiations had taught him the power of measured responses. "Excuse me," James said, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made everyone in earshot look up. "That's my son you're speaking to." Officer Dawson turned, irritation clear on his face at the interruption. "Sir, this is a security matter." "I need you to step back." James didn't move. "May I ask what security concern my 12-year-old son has raised?" "That's not something I can discuss with," Officer Dawson began. "With his father?" James finished, raising an eyebrow. "I believe that's exactly who you should be discussing it with." Officer Bryant stepped forward, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. "Sir, are you James Richardson?" "I am," James confirmed, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Officer Bryant, Airport Security." the man replied, shaking James's hand with noticeably more respect than his colleague had shown. There was some confusion about your son's boarding pass. Confusion? James repeated, glancing at Andre, who looked both relieved and tense. What kind of confusion? Before Officer Bryant could answer, Officer Dawson cut in. Your son was alone in a restricted area with a first-class ticket that didn't seem to belong to him. We were simply investigating a potential security breach. The elderly woman beside Andre made a sound of disbelief. That is not what happened, she said firmly. These officers harassed this young man for no reason at all. James looked at the woman with genuine gratitude. Thank you for staying with my son, ma'am. I appreciate your kindness. The woman waved away his thanks. Anyone would have done the same. Or should have. James turned back to Officer Dawson, his expression hardening slightly. My son had a valid boarding pass for a flight that doesn't board for another. He checked his watch. 5 minutes. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, waiting for me. What exactly made you suspect a security breach? Officer Dawson's jaw tightened. Sir, we have protocols for unaccompanied minors. My son is not an unaccompanied minor, James interrupted smoothly. He was waiting for me, his parent, at our designated gate. That's hardly unusual. The circumstances were suspicious, Officer Dawson insisted. What circumstances? James pressed. Be specific, please. A tense silence followed. Around them, passengers had given up any pretense of not listening, openly watching the confrontation unfold. The gate agent, who had been hovering nervously nearby, suddenly stepped forward. Mr. Richardson, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. Is there anything I can do to make your journey more comfortable? The deference in her tone was unmistakable. Officer Bryant glanced between the gate agent and James with growing uncertainty. Officer Dawson, however, seemed unimpressed. You know this man? Officer Dawson asked the gate agent. She looked at him as if he had asked if she knew the president. Of course I do. This is James Richardson. The name clearly meant nothing to Officer Dawson. And? The gate agent opened her mouth to respond, but James held up a hand to stop her. It's not important, he said. What is important is understanding why my son was singled out for this treatment. From nearby, the terminal manager appeared, moving with the hurried walk of someone who had just received unsettling news. Unlike Officer Dawson, she clearly recognized James immediately. Mr. Richardson, she said, slightly breathless. I just heard you were here. Welcome to the terminal. Is everything all right? James turned to her with a calm that didn't reach his eyes. No, Miss Chen, she supplied quickly. Lisa Chen, Terminal Operations Manager. Ms. Chen, everything is not all right. My son was waiting for me at our gate when he was apparently subjected to what can only be described as harassment by your security staff. Ms. Chen's face fell. I'm deeply sorry to hear that, sir. We take such matters extremely seriously. As do I, James replied, particularly when they involve my family. Officer Bryant shifted uncomfortably, finally seeming to understand that something important was happening. Officer Dawson, however, remained defiant. We were just doing our job, he insisted. Airport security is not a joke. Neither is the dignity of a 12-year-old boy, James countered. His voice still measured, but with an edge that made several people within earshot straighten involuntarily. Neither is profiling, Officer Dawson. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Officer Dawson's face flushed. That's not what happened here. No, James asked, his eyebrow raised again. Then explain to me why my son, sitting quietly with a valid first-class ticket, was deemed suspicious enough to warrant not one but 2 security officers questioning him, searching his belongings and threatening to take him to a security office. Ms. Chen looked horrified. Officers, is this true? Officer Bryant looked at the ground. Officer Dawson's flush deepened. The situation was more complicated than that. I'd like to hear exactly how it was more complicated, James said. He gestured to Andre. Come here, son. Andre rose and walked to his father's side, standing a little straighter now that he wasn't alone. Tell me what happened, James said gently, from the beginning. As Andre recounted the events of the past hour, James's expression remained neutral, but those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tensing of his shoulders. The elderly woman occasionally nodded in confirmation, adding details that Andre had missed or downplayed. When Andre finished speaking, the gate area was completely silent. Even the usual airport announcements seemed to have paused. James placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture both protective and proud. Then he turned back to Ms. Chen. Ms. Chen, I believe we need to discuss this further, but not here. My son and I have a flight to catch, and I don't want to delay the other passengers. Of course, Mr. Richardson, she agreed quickly. We can speak in my office after you board. That won't be necessary, James said. I think this discussion needs to happen at a higher level. Please arrange for someone from your executive team to contact my office tomorrow morning. Ms. Chen nodded, clearly understanding the seriousness of the situation. Yes, sir. I'll make sure of it. The boarding announcement finally came over the loudspeaker, momentarily breaking the tension. Passengers began gathering their belongings, though many continued to watch the scene with interest. Officer Dawson, apparently unwilling to back down entirely, made one last attempt. Sir, regardless of what you think happened here, we were following established security protocols. James turned to him, his calm facade finally showing cracks. Officer Dawson, if humiliating a child for the crime of existing while black is part of your established security protocols, then perhaps those protocols need to be re-examined. The bluntness of the statement seemed to shock Officer Dawson into silence. A man in a pilot's uniform approached, nodding respectfully to James. Mr. Richardson, we're ready to begin boarding. Would you and your son like to board first? Thank you, Captain, James replied. We would appreciate that. As they turned to go, the elderly woman who had stayed with Andre touched James's arm gently. Your son was very brave, she said quietly. You should be proud. James's expression softened. I am. Every day. He glanced back at the officers and terminal manager, though I wish he didn't have to be quite so brave quite so often. The woman nodded in understanding. As James and Andre walked toward the boarding gate, passengers and staff alike watched them go. Something about James's bearing, the deference shown by the airline staff, and the tension still hovering in the air made it clear to everyone present. This was not over, and Officer Dawson, standing rigid beside his increasingly anxious colleague, had no idea just how much trouble was heading his way. The first-class cabin was quiet and calm, a stark contrast to the tension at the gate. As James and Andre settled into their seats, a flight attendant immediately appeared with pre-flight drinks. Mr. Richardson, we're so honored to have you aboard today, she said warmly. If there's anything at all you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, James replied with a polite nod. Some privacy for now would be appreciated. Of course, sir. As the flight attendant moved away, Andre looked at his father with questions in his eyes. The past hour had been a whirlwind, and now that they were finally alone, he needed to understand what had happened. Dad, he said quietly. Everyone at the gate started acting weird when you showed up. The manager lady looked like she was going to pass out. James sighed, taking a moment before answering. I wish I could tell you it was because I'm such an impressive person, he said with a small smile. But the truth is, people treat me differently because of what I do, not who I am. What do you mean? James turned slightly in his seat to face his son. Remember I told you about the big meeting today? The emergency that made me late? Andre nodded. That meeting was the final step in a process that's been going on for months. As of this morning, our investment firm now holds a controlling interest in the company that manages this airport, and 6 others across the country. Andre's eyes widened as understanding dawned. So you own the airport? Not personally, no. The firm does. But as CEO and majority shareholder of the firm? James let the implication hang in the air. That's why everyone was treating you like that, Andre said, the pieces falling into place. That's why the manager was so nervous. Yes, James acknowledged. Though none of that should have mattered. What happened to you today was wrong, regardless of who your father is or isn't. Andre looked down at his hands. What's going to happen to Officer Dawson? That depends, James said carefully. What do you think should happen? Andre considered the question seriously, remembering the humiliation, the anger, the helplessness he had felt. But he also remembered something else his father had taught him, the difference between justice and revenge. I don't think he should lose his job, Andre said finally, but he needs to learn why what he did was wrong. James studied his son's face, pride evident in his expression. I think that's very wise. The plane began its taxi toward the runway as they fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were airborne Miami-bound that Andre spoke again. Dad, does this happen to you too? People treating you differently because of how you look? James considered his answer carefully. Yes, less often now that I have certain protections, money, position, influence. But yes, it still happens. How do you handle it? Not always as well as you did today, James admitted. Sometimes I get angry. Sometimes I fight back. Not always in the most productive ways. He paused. But I've learned that the most powerful response is to change the systems that allow it to happen in the first place. Andre nodded slowly, absorbing his father's words. Is that what you're going to do at the airport? That's exactly what I'm going to do. Back at the airport, the terminal was buzzing with activity. Word had spread quickly among the staff about what had happened at gate C-17. Officer Dawson, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, had returned to his regular patrol duties with a chip on his shoulder. Can you believe that guy? He complained to Officer Bryant as they walked through the terminal. Acting like his kid deserves special treatment. Officer Bryant looked uncomfortable. I think we might have handled that situation badly, he said. We did our job, Dawson insisted. Just because some first-class passenger gets upset doesn't mean we were wrong. Dawson, did you not see how everyone was reacting to him? The terminal manager practically ran to the gate when she heard he was there. So what? Some rich guy who thinks the rules don't apply to him or his kid. Bryant stopped walking, forcing Dawson to stop as well. You really don't know who that was, do you? Dawson shrugged. Should I? That was James Richardson, CEO of Richardson Capital, the firm that just bought a controlling stake in the airport authority. The color drained from Dawson's face. What? The board meeting to finalize the deal was this morning. It's been all over the internal memos for weeks. How did you miss that? Dawson rarely bothered reading staff communications. He considered them a waste of time, filled with corporate jargon and meaningless updates. Now that decision was coming back to haunt him. You're telling me that kid's dad owns the airport? Dawson asked, his voice hollow. Not personally, but his firm does. And from what I hear, he's not just the CEO. He's the majority shareholder. So yeah, in effect, he controls the airport, including security operations. Dawson's radio crackled to life before he could process this information. Officer Dawson, report to the security office immediately. Director Williams wants to see you. Bryant gave him a grim look. Good luck with that. When Officer Dawson arrived at the security office, he was surprised to find not only Director Williams waiting for him, but also Lisa Chen, the terminal operations manager, and a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit whom he didn't recognize. Officer Dawson, Director Williams said, his voice unusually formal. This is Patricia Reynolds, Executive Vice President of the Airport Authority. Dawson swallowed hard. Executive Vice Presidents didn't typically concern themselves with routine security matters. Ms. Reynolds has some questions about an incident that occurred at Gate C-17 earlier today, Director Williams continued. We expect your full cooperation. Patricia Reynolds studied Dawson with cool professionalism. Officer, are you familiar with our anti-discrimination policies? Dawson straightened defensively. Of course. I've never discriminated against anyone. I follow the security protocols as trained. I see, Reynolds said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe him. Let's review what happened today, shall we? For the next 20 minutes, Dawson endured a meticulous breakdown of his actions at Gate C-17. Every word he had spoken, every decision he had made was dissected and examined. The more they talked, the more Dawson began to understand the seriousness of his situation. Our preliminary review indicates that you violated at least 6 different policies, Reynolds concluded, not to mention the potential legal implications of your behavior. Dawson felt sweat beading on his forehead. I was just doing my job. The boy was alone and the first-class ticket seemed suspicious. Suspicious how exactly? Reynolds asked sharply. Dawson hesitated, suddenly aware of the trap. He didn't look like he belonged there. And what does someone who belongs in first class look like, Officer Dawson? The question hung in the air, damning in its simplicity. Dawson had no good answer. That's what I thought, Reynolds said after his prolonged silence. Director Williams will inform you of next steps regarding your employment status. For now, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Dawson's world tilted beneath him. Suspended? But that will be all, officer. Director Williams cut in. Please turn in your badge and radio before you leave. 3 hours into their flight, as Andre dozed beside him, James Richardson's phone pinged with an encrypted message. It was from Patricia Reynolds, an executive he'd worked closely with during the acquisition process. Incident at Gate C-17 being thoroughly investigated. Officer D suspended pending review. Full report to follow. Recommendations for systemic changes requested at your convenience. James typed a brief response. Thank you for the quick action. I'll have comprehensive recommendations for you by week's end. This needs to be more than just addressing one individual. He set his phone aside and glanced at his sleeping son. The incident had shaken Andre more than he was letting on. James could see it in the way his son had fallen into an exhausted sleep almost immediately after takeoff. The emotional toll of the confrontation finally catching up with him. James felt a familiar mixture of love, pride, and sorrow. Proud of how his son had handled himself, but sorrowful that at 12 years old, Andre already had to know how to navigate such situations. The burden of teaching his son these harsh realities weighed heavily on James's heart. His phone pinged again. Another message from Reynolds. Mr. Richardson, there's something else you should know. Several passengers who witnessed the incident have already filed formal complaints. One has posted about it on social media, though without naming your son. The post is gaining traction. James frowned. He valued his privacy and his son's even more, but perhaps there was value in letting this story unfold in the public eye, not with Andre's name attached, but as an example of the everyday indignities that needed to be addressed. He considered his response carefully before typing. Let the complaints process proceed naturally. As for social media, monitor but don't interfere unless my son's name appears. Sometimes sunlight is the best disinfectant. James put his phone away and leaned back in his seat, his mind already working on the changes he would implement. This wouldn't be a simple matter of disciplining one officer. The problem was systemic, and it required systemic solutions. Beyond policy revisions and sensitivity training, James envisioned a community oversight board with real power, a completely revamped complaint process, transparent reporting of incidents, and consequences for those who abuse their authority. The airport under his firm's control would become a model for others to follow. It wouldn't undo what had happened to Andre today. Nothing could, but it might prevent another child from experiencing the same humiliation. As the plane soared toward Miami, James Richardson made a silent promise to his sleeping son. The power and privilege he had worked so hard to achieve would be used to create meaningful change, not just for Andre, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong because of how they looked. Officer Dawson had no idea, but his confrontation with Andre Richardson would ultimately transform airport security procedures across the country. Sometimes, James reflected, the most powerful changes began with the most painful moments. 6 months later, Officer Dawson stood in front of the newly formed Airport Community Oversight Board, his uniform pressed and his expression solemn. The room was filled with a diverse group of people, community leaders, airport executives, security experts, and ordinary citizens who had applied to serve on the board. Officer Dawson, the chairperson said, "You've completed the required training program. Today we'd like to hear your thoughts on what you've learned." Dawson nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. The past 6 months had been the most challenging of his career, and perhaps his life. After his suspension, he had expected to be fired. Instead, something unexpected had happened. 6 months ago, Dawson began, I thought I was just doing my job when I confronted a young boy at Gate C-17. I told myself I was following protocol, protecting the public, being vigilant. He paused, looking around the room. I was wrong. What I did that day wasn't security, it was profiling. It wasn't protection, it was prejudice. And the hardest part for me to admit was that I didn't even recognize it in myself. The board members watched him carefully, some with skepticism, others with cautious hope. The training program opened my eyes, Dawson continued, particularly the sessions led by people who've experienced profiling firsthand. Hearing their stories, it changed something in me. What Dawson didn't say was how close he had come to quitting altogether, how the humiliation of being suspended, of having his actions scrutinized and found wanting, had initially filled him with resentment rather than understanding. It had taken weeks of reflection, and the unexpected intervention of someone he had come to respect, for him to recognize the opportunity he was being given. 2 months after the incident, James Richardson had made good on his promise to implement changes. The Airport Community Oversight Board was just one of many reforms. There was also mandatory anti-bias training, a revised complaint system with real accountability, and regular audits of security interactions to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior. But perhaps the most surprising change had come when James had requested a private meeting with Officer Dawson. The meeting had taken place in a small conference room at the airport administrative offices. Dawson had arrived defensive, expecting to be berated by a powerful executive flexing his influence. Instead, he had found James sitting alone, without lawyers or executives to back him up. "Officer Dawson," James had said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" Dawson had replied stiffly. "We always have choices," James had answered calmly. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you." For the next hour, James had done something Dawson hadn't expected. He had listened. He had asked Dawson about his background, his 18 years in security work, his perspective on the job. He had asked about the pressures, the challenges, the split-second decisions required. And then when Dawson had run out of words, James had shared his own story. Not just about that day at the airport with Andre, but about a lifetime of being judged by his appearance before his character. About teaching his son the painful realities of navigating a world where some people would always see him as suspicious. "No matter how he behaved, I'm not here to punish you, Officer Dawson," James had said as the meeting drew to a close. "I'm here to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Dawson had asked warily. "You can fight the changes coming to this airport, see them as a personal attack and eventually find yourself working somewhere else. Or you can be part of the solution. You can help us build something better." "Why would you want my help after what happened?" James had smiled slightly. "Because sometimes the people who were part of the problem have the most valuable insights into fixing it. And because my son believes you deserve a chance to learn and grow. He's a better person than I am in that regard." Now standing before the board, Dawson thought about that conversation and the journey it had set him on. "I've volunteered to help develop the new training materials for security personnel," he told the board. "Based on my experience, I believe we need to address not just overt bias, but the subtle assumptions we make without realizing it. The way we can convince ourselves that our suspicions are based on behavior when they're really based on appearance." Patricia Reynolds, who sat on the board as the airport authority representative, nodded approvingly. "And how do you feel this will change day-to-day security operations?" "It will make us better at our jobs," Dawson said firmly. "True security isn't about stopping people who look suspicious. It's about identifying actual behavioral indicators of threat while treating everyone with dignity and respect." After Dawson finished his presentation, the board voted unanimously to reinstate him to active duty, with the additional responsibility of helping to train other officers in the new protocols. As the meeting adjourned, Patricia Reynolds approached him. "There's someone who'd like to speak with you," she said, gesturing toward the door. Dawson turned to see James Richardson entering the room, and beside him, to Dawson's surprise, was Andre. Dawson had not seen either of them since that day at Gate C-17. He felt a rush of shame, followed by a strange sense of gratitude. Without the confrontation that day, without being forced to face his own biases, he might have continued as he was for the rest of his career, never growing, never changing. "Officer Dawson," James greeted him, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your reinstatement." Dawson shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the direct gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for everything." James nodded, understanding the broader meaning. Then he turned to his son. "Andre has something he'd like to say to you." Andre stepped forward. He had grown taller in the 6 months since their first meeting, and his eyes held a maturity beyond his years. "I've been following the changes at the airport," Andre said. "My dad shows me the reports. I think it's good what you're doing with the training and stuff." "Thank you," Dawson replied, genuinely touched by the boy's words. "I'm trying."